I had never missed a single milestone in my sister Natalie's life. I was there for her graduation, her first job interview, her tearful nights over high school breakups, and the day she got engaged. So when her wedding invitation arrived in the mail, I didn't think twice. I marked the date, cleared my schedule, and even helped her find a bakery when the first one canceled. That's the kind of sister I've always been: reliable, supportive, never the center of attention, but always present. When people thought of Natalie's support system, they thought of me. Or so I believe. The envelope was elegant: white, linen paper, gold foil, wax seal. Typical Natalie, but something about it felt strangely formal. It was addressed to me and my husband, Caleb, but the wording lacked her usual warmth. "You are cordially invited," it read, "not can't wait to celebrate with you." Like she used to write on birthday cards or texts. I brushed it off. Maybe she was overwhelmed. Planning a wedding was stressful, after all, and besides, this was going to be a magical day. Her magical day. I told myself I was just reading too much into it. The ceremony was being held at an upscale vineyard too. Ours outside the city? I had never been there before, but Natalie had always dreamed of a wedding in the countryside, with old stone buildings, rows of grapevines, and fairy lights strung from one antique lamppost to another. As we drove up the winding road that morning, the sun rising behind the hills, everything looked picture perfect. It was hard not to be excited for her, for the love story she was finally sealing, for the memories we were about to make. Caleb held my hand as we parked, and I remember feeling so calm, content. Maybe, I thought, this would be a turning point. Maybe this day would finally show our family that we had both made it, that we were equals. I wasn't the other daughter anymore. I was Alyssa, a person of my own. I even wore a dress Natalie had complimented once. Emerald green, simple but classy. She used to say it made my eyes stand out. But the moment we stepped into the reception area, something started to feel off. Subtle things, the way some of the guests, extended family, old neighbors, looked at me, smiled thinly, then turned away quickly. The way one of Natalie's bridesmaids, Lily, greeted Caleb with an over-the-top hug and barely nodded at me. The seating chart, when I found it, had our name split. Caleb seated at the groom's table. Me, not listed, not even on the overflow table near the speakers. Caleb asked if I wanted him to speak to someone. I shook my head, too embarrassed to make a scene. "I'll just sit with you," I whispered. But when we approached his table, one of the ushers stopped us and said gently, "Only immediate family of the groom at this one." "Sorry." The groom's mother smiled apologetically, but there was something condescending in her eyes, like I should have known better. Eventually, a hostess led me to a small round table in the back, right next to the bar. My name had been scribbled onto a plain white place card, unlike the elegant gold calligraphy everyone else had. The other people at the table? A couple of Natalie's old classmates I hadn't seen since high school, and to colleagues of the groom who didn't know who I was. I smiled. I tried to blend. I told myself again and again, don't ruin her day. Then came the ceremony. Chairs were lined up facing the vineyard, guests whispering and adjusting their sunglasses. Caleb stood beside me, but I could feel the tension in his posture. As the music swelled and Natalie began her walk down the aisle, radiant, confident, I couldn't help but smile. I knew she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. She looked beautiful, like someone out of a bridal magazine. Everything was perfect except Caleb didn't smile, not once. I leaned toward him and whispered, "Are you okay?" He didn't answer. His eyes darted around, not just watching Natalie, but scanning the guests, the decorations, the stage setup. I frowned. Then the vows began, and that's when it happened. He leaned into me, very slowly, and whispered, "We have to leave, now." I blinked. "What? Why?" His voice was tight, almost angry. "I'll explain in the car. But we're leaving. Now." I looked around, panicked. The ceremony was still going. People were listening, clapping, tearing up. Natalie hadn't even finished her vows. "We can't just walk out," I hissed. "I'm not asking," he said. His hand was already on mine. Firm, urgent. I didn't understand it at the time. I thought maybe something had happened at work. Maybe he was sick. Maybe someone had called with an emergency. But when I looked at his face, really looked, I saw something else, rage, not directed at me, but it's something much larger. I hesitated, and that pause felt like an eternity. Then I nodded. We stood quietly, discreetly, and slipped away between two hedges lining the aisle. No one noticed, or at least, I thought no one did. But Caleb later told me someone did see. And they smirked. The silence in the car was unbearable. I kept replaying the ceremony in my head, the strange looks, the missing name card, the bridesmaid who ignored me, the father-daughter speech at the rehearsal dinner the night before, where I hadn't even been mentioned once. And I remember thinking, over and over, Why does this feel like? It wasn't about them at all. That question would haunt me. But it wouldn't stay unanswered for long. Caleb didn't say another word until we were almost halfway down the vineyard road, the wedding shrinking behind us in a rearview mirror. Like some kind of elaborate stage set closing its curtains, I had 1,000 questions boiling in my chest, but I didn't ask any of them. I was still stunned by the way he had spoken, not angrily, not panicked, but like someone who had made a calculation and knew the exact moment to get out. He wasn't flustered, he was furious, quietly, intensely furious in a way I had only seen twice in all our years together. Once when someone tried to scam my grandmother, and once when his little sister's ex-boyfriend showed up at her work uninvited. That was the man driving beside me now, calm hands, burning eyes. We reached the main road and still he didn't speak. Caleb, I finally said, please. You need to tell me what that was. He didn't look at me, just kept his eyes on the road, hands gripping the wheel tightly. I'll tell you everything, just let me get us home. No, I said, sharper than I meant to. You can't do that. You can't pull me out of my sister's wedding in the middle of the ceremony, and then say I'll explain later like you forgot your keys or something. He exhaled slowly. Okay? Fine. But I want you to understand something before I say it. Understand what? He looked at me then, just a glance, but it felt like a question. Are you ready for this? Your family, he began, has been building something for years, a narrative? A performance. Today was the final act, and I wasn't going to let you sit there like a prop in your own humiliation. I stared at him, confused. What are you talking about? He didn't answer right away. We passed a field of sunflowers. I remember it because I looked out the window and tried to focus on anything else, to anchor myself before the ground shifted again. Then, he spoke. You really didn't notice, did you? I blinked. Notice what? Caleb gave a bitter laugh. Alyssa, that wedding wasn't for Natalie and Ryan, it was for your parents, for your extended family, for everyone who ever whispered that Natalie was a successful one. The golden child, it was a carefully designed theater, a performance, meant to do one thing, diminish you. Publicly, subtly, completely. My heart began to pound. That's not possible. It is, he said. And they almost pulled it off, almost. I shook my head. That doesn't make sense. Why would Natalie? She's been doing it for years. He cut in. Only you were too kind, too loyal to see it. You made excuses. I watched you do it over and over again. I sat back, reeling. Images started to float in my mind. Things I dismissed. Natalie forgetting to introduce me at her engagement dinner. My name missing from the bridal party brunch invite. The vague jokes she made about my work during family gatherings. And then, the seating chart, the way Lily looked at me. The back table near the bar, my name written last minute. All the moments that felt slightly off. Like the air had changed and I had chosen not to breathe deeply enough to notice why. Caleb, I whispered. What exactly did you see? He gripped the wheel tighter. They were mocking you, Alyssa, all of them. The speeches, the pauses when your name should have been mentioned but wasn't. The way your dad said, we've always been proud of Natalie for paving her own way when you were the first one to move out, to get a job, to help pay off his damn loan. The slideshow, did you see it? I hadn't. I was outside helping the caterers because the dessert station was missing napkins. Something Natalie asked me to check. I thought I was being helpful. I thought that's what sisters did. They showed childhood photos, he said, and you were barely in them. When you did appear, the captions made you the punchline. Natalie and her little shadow. Natalie teaching Alyssa how to pose, and the crowd laughed. They laughed, Alyssa, and your sister was eating it up. I covered my mouth. I didn't know whether I wanted to scream or cry. That wasn't a wedding, he continued. It was an orchestrated humiliation, a soft one, sure. One you could have written off, but I saw it. I've seen it building for years, and I couldn't stand there and let them do it again. Not to you. I closed my eyes. The inside of the car was too quiet, the air too heavy. He glanced at me. You okay? I don't know, I whispered. He pulled the car over to the side of the road, stopped the engine, and turned to me fully. You're brilliant, Alyssa. You're kind. You have more integrity in your silence than most people have in their entire lives. But they treat you like you're disposable. And the worst part, you let them. I didn't answer because he was right. Somewhere deep down, I had always known it. I just hadn't wanted to believe it. I need you to understand, Caleb said gently, that walking out wasn't an escape. It was a rescue. You were never going to win inside that script because it wasn't written for you. I stared at the dashboard for a long time. My hands were trembling. I thought about all the birthdays, holidays, milestones where I was present, and quiet and generous, and how they were slowly rewritten by people who never really wanted me there. Then I said the only thing I could say, thank you. His hand found mine. You don't have to thank me. You just have to stop playing the role they gave you. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean, like something toxic had been pulled out of the air. Like the curtain had finally fallen and the lights were on. We drove the rest of the way home without speaking, and I let the quiet wrap around me like a coat I hadn't known I needed. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there, staring out the window, watching the trees go by, and wondering how many times in my life I had mistaken poison for perfume, just because it came from people I called family. But that night, something broke, or maybe something began. The road home had never felt this long. I sat in the passenger seat, legs tucked in, arms crossed, staring at nothing. The trees outside blurred into one another like green brushstrokes, and still I couldn't focus. Caleb had just peeled away years of loyalty, denial, and hope with a few carefully chosen sentences, and yet, as painful as it was, I didn't doubt him, not for a second, because in the quiet I started to remember. And the more I remembered, the more I realized that this wedding wasn't an isolated event, it was a final act in a play I didn't even know I'd been cast in. I kept replaying his words in my head. They treat you like you're disposable. And the worst part, you let them. That was what hurt the most, not what they had done, but what I had accepted, what I had excused, what I had forgiven too quickly, too often, just to keep the peace. Growing up, I was always the one who didn't cause trouble. Natalie was dramatic, loud, the star of every family function. I was the one who folded napkins, who helped mom clean the kitchen, who remembered everyone's birthdays and never asked for anything in return. I thought being reliable would earn me love. It didn't. It just made me invisible. The drive stretched on in silence, but it wasn't a peaceful one. It was a silence that buzzed, the kind that came with unasked questions, with a storm building behind your ribs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry, but I just sat there, fists clenched, trying to keep the dam inside me from breaking. At one point, I glanced over at Caleb. He was focused on the road, but I could see it in his face. He was waiting, not for me to say thank you again, but for something deeper, for me to stop pretending. So I spoke, not loudly, just enough to cut through the buzz. How long have you known? He didn't take his eyes off the road. A while. I turned toward him. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He paused, thoughtful, because I didn't want to take away your hope. I kept thinking maybe I was wrong, maybe they'd come around. But today, there was no doubt. I looked back out the window. I think part of me always knew. I know. Another silence. This one softer. I used to think Natalie was just careless, I said, voice flat, like maybe she didn't realize how things came off. That she didn't mean to exclude me. But she knew exactly what she was doing, didn't she? Caleb nodded. She did. Every detail of that wedding was crafted. Every speech, every seating chart, every picture. It wasn't random. I didn't even see the slideshow. I muttered, "You were outside, helping the caterers because she asked me to," I said bitterly. She looked me in the eye and said, "Can you check on the dessert napkins? I think they forgot." He didn't have to say anything. I already knew what it meant. I missed the only part of the night where I might have been included, just so she could make sure I wasn't there to see how they mocked me. That wasn't a coincidence. Alyssa, that was choreography. I covered my face with my hands, rubbing my temples as if I could physically erase the memories. "God, I feel so stupid." "Don't," he said sharply. "You're not stupid, you're kind. There's a difference." I let them use me again. No, they tried. "You walked out." That stopped me because he was right. I did walk out. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't flip a table or call anyone out. I just got up and left, because somewhere deep inside me, even if I didn't understand it fully, I knew I didn't belong there. Not like that. Not as the convenient, quiet sister who smiles through the pain and claps for everyone else's success, while her own is ignored or twisted into a joke. I shifted in my seat, letting the words sink in. They weren't celebrating love. They were celebrating power and status, Caleb added. And control. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "You know what's funny? I spent 2 weeks helping Natalie write her vows. I stayed up late, editing drafts, choosing phrases that would sound poetic without being cliché. I thought I was helping her have a beautiful wedding. She used you to perfect a script that humiliated you." "Yeah," I whispered. "She really did." The memories kept coming now like a flood. Natalie pretending to be surprised when I gave her the wedding gift, even though I had asked for her registry 3 times. Our parents acting as if my husband was just the plus one, while praising her fiance's every joke. The way they introduced me to the guests. "This is Alyssa, Natalie's sister," as if that was the only relevant fact about me. I sat up straighter. Do you think they hate me?" Caleb shook his head. "No. I think they resent you." "Why?" "Because you don't need them, and they hate that they can't control you." That hit something deep inside. It made a strange kind of sense. I had left home early, moved to another state, built a career without asking for help. I had a solid marriage, real friends, peace. I never bragged about it, never threw it in their faces, but they saw it and maybe they couldn't stand that my quiet, steady life didn't need their approval to feel complete. They wanted to make sure everyone saw me as the lesser one, I said. Caleb nodded. They needed to write the ending of a story they've been telling for years, that Natalie is a successful one, that you're the tag-along, the shadow, the extra, and I was supposed to sit there and smile while they told it. But you didn't know. I said quietly, I didn't, and for the first time in years, I felt the smallest flicker of something I hadn't felt since childhood. Power. Not anger, not pride, just quiet, calm certainty. I had seen the truth now. I couldn't unsee it. And I couldn't pretend anymore that this was just how families worked. That love and cruelty could live side by side. That car ride didn't feel like an escape. It felt like a beginning, like someone had finally handed me the pen and said, write your own damn story now. And I intended to. I didn't sleep that night. Even after Caleb had fallen into a restless slumber beside me, I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, letting the details rearrange themselves like puzzle pieces finally snapping into place. What once seemed like a normal wedding now reeked of pretense. Nothing about it had been casual or innocent. It was all design. Everything had been built around a central, silent goal: humiliate me without ever saying my name. It started with the invitations. I remember getting ours 2 weeks after everyone else at the time. Natalie brushed it off, claiming the post office must have been slow. I believed her, of course I did. She was always full of quick excuses and I was always quick to accept them. But now, thinking back, I wondered if that delay was intentional, if it was a calculated way to make sure I'd scramble to make arrangements late and feel disorganized, lesser. Then there was the seating chart. Caleb and I weren't at the family table. We were tucked away near the kitchen, next to the DJ booth. Our chairs were unstable, and our view of the ceremony was partially blocked by a decorative plant that looked like it had been shoved there as an afterthought. At the time, I smiled through it. I thought she probably didn't notice, but now I knew better. And the speeches, God, the speeches. It started with our father. He stood with his champagne glass held high, pride glowing on his face like he'd won something. Natalie has always been our star, he said. From the moment she was born, we knew she'd shine. A pause, then a laugh. And thank God she didn't take after her older sister, who's lovely in her own way, of course, but a bit more under the radar. Everyone chuckled, everyone except me. I swallowed the lump in my throat and clapped. I remember Caleb reaching for my hand under the table. I squeezed it once as if to say, it's okay, I'm used to this. But I shouldn't have been. Then came Natalie's best friend, Kim, with her carefully scripted toast. I've known Natalie since college, and I always admired her ambition. She never settled for mediocrity. She always reached higher. That's why she deserves someone like Jonathan who matches her success, her energy, her brilliance. Not everyone gets that kind of partnership. Some people just settle. More laughter. This time a few heads turned toward me. I felt them before I saw them. I looked down at my plate. Caleb's hand never left mine. The codes were subtle, but now I saw them for what they were: strategic darts, wrapped in silk. No one had to say my name. That was the brilliance of it. It was all implication. Precision, cruelty. Even the music told a story. The couple's first dance was to a song Natalie and I used to love growing up. We sang it together at night, giggling in our shared bedroom, making up harmonies. She had promised once that if she ever got married, we'd sing it together at the reception. Instead, she danced to it alone with a smirk on her face, looking right past me as the lyrics played. Some people get lucky in life, but others just fade into the background. I felt like I was fading, disappearing into the folds of that carefully curated night, and I wasn't alone in noticing it. Later, Caleb told me about the glances, the nods exchanged between Natalie and her college friends, the way Jonathan's brothers, whom I'd never met, pointed me out subtly during their group conversations. That's her, one of them had whispered as if I were a secret, a side character, a name they'd heard in passing, turned into a joke over time. It all aligned the way my name was avoided in speeches. The photos on display showing family moments where I had been conveniently cropped out. The single table in the back labeled overflow where Caleb and I were seated. I remembered Natalie hugging me once that evening and whispering, "Don't be mad. Today's not about you." Her voice had been so sweet, so light. At the time, I nodded and smiled. I even felt guilty for standing near the spotlight. But now, I understood the deeper layer of that moment. It wasn't a warning, it was a message, a boundary. Stay small, stay quiet. This isn't your stage. The weirdest part? I wasn't even surprised. Somewhere deep down, I think I always knew what role I played in our family dynamic. I was the foil, the soft one, The example of what Natalie wasn't. She was loud, brilliant, assertive. I was gentle, I was nice. I was useful when she needed a ride or an extra pair of hands. But when I succeeded, when I found love, when I moved up in my own quiet way, it threatened the balance she had carefully constructed. She needed to be the center, I needed to orbit. And that wedding was her masterpiece. Every line spoken, every smirk shared, every chair placed, it was all part of a script. One I didn't audition for but had been cast in long ago without consent, without costume, without applause. I was never meant to shine. I was meant to reflect. But here's the thing about reflections, they eventually break that night. In the car, Caleb said something that stuck with me. You saw it. You just didn't want to believe it, and that's not your fault. You were raised to think love looked like tolerance. That family meant enduring subtle cruelty for the sake of tradition. He was right, they called it love, but it was control. They called it humor, but it was humiliation. They called it inclusion, but it was erasure. And now, wide awake in the early hours of morning, I saw all of it for what it truly was. That wedding wasn't a celebration of a union. It was a funeral for my silence. And I was done mourning. The next morning, I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Not the makeup-smudged version of myself I saw the night before, but the version of me that still lingered beneath, one that had always hoped, maybe even begged for the benefit of the doubt. That part of me had been slowly dying for years, and last night, Natalie buried it with a champagne toast and 1,000 silent knives. I replayed the entire evening in my mind. Not just the obvious humiliations, but the smaller moments, the glances, the jokes, the details I hadn't noticed until Caleb connected the dots. And then it hit me. That wedding wasn't just a stage, it was a trap, a social ambush designed to exalt one person and reduce another to a whisper, and the person being reduced was me. I was a real guest of honor. Not in admiration, but in mockery. The entire event was built around me without ever being for me. And the sickest part was how meticulously they had planned it all. This wasn't a clumsy mistake or an accidental oversight. It was curated, rehearsed, intentional. The playlist that included songs I once told Natalie I wanted at my own wedding, songs I had sent her years ago when we used to talk about our dreams. Back when I still thought we were close. The slideshow of family memories that conveniently skipped every birthday of mine. Every holiday photo where I was even remotely centered. And the part of the father of the bride's speech where he said, Natalie was always the one we knew. With Thrive, she was never afraid of risk, unlike some who prefer the safety of small lives. The room had laughed. My hand had gripped Caleb so tightly it turned white. At the time, I thought it was just another dig. But now I saw it for what it truly was, a declaration. A warning shot, a public reminder that I was and would always be the lesser sister. But there was something else I hadn't fully processed until that morning. Something Caleb had hinted at, but hadn't fully explained until we were both seated with our coffee. The morning sun creeping through the blinds like a spotlight on truth. He took a sip and said, it wasn't just about hurting you, it was about proving to everyone that they could. And suddenly, I understood. The entire structure of that wedding had been built like a stage. Yes, but not just for Natalie to shine. It was a demonstration. A performance designed to show everyone in the family, every friend, every plus one, that Natalie had won, that she was a queen. That she could invite her sister, sit her near the trash bins, cut her out of photos, humiliate her with passive-aggressive speeches, and I would still show up, still smile, still clap. Because that's what I always did. I was never the rebel. I never caused scenes, I endured. That was my role, and Natalie, smart as ever, had learned how to weaponize that. I wasn't just being mocked. I was being tested. Would I finally snap? Would I storm out? Or would I do what I always did, swallow the insult, pretend it didn't sting, and let her have her crown? They bet on my silence. But this time, they lost. As the pieces fell into place, I began to remember the smaller slights leading up to the wedding. How Natalie had accidentally left me out of the bridal shower group chat. How she hadn't asked me to be a bridesmaid, saying it was a small wedding party even though there were 5 bridesmaids, and to junior ones. How the dress code email I received was different from everyone else's, casual, when in reality, the rest of the guests were dressed in formal evening wear. She wanted me to stand out. She wanted me to look unprepared. She wanted me to feel out of place. And I did. But what she didn't count on, what none of them did, was that Caleb would see it. That he would whisper when he did. That we would leave, and that I would wake up, because up until that wedding, a part of me still wanted to belong. Still wanted the hugs to be real. Still wanted my sister to look at me and see me, not as a threat, or a shadow to outshine, but as family. But the truth was, I was never supposed to be seen. I was supposed to be useful, predictable, quiet, and that wedding was a final act in a decades-long play written by people who thought they knew me. But they did in single quotes t. The real guest of honor wasn't the bride. It wasn't Jonathan. It wasn't even their future. It was me. Not the me who sat in the corner holding back tears. Not the me who fake laughed at digs delivered with a champagne smile. But the me who, when pushed far enough, would finally stand up, finally speak, finally step off their stage and start building my own. Because you don't invite someone to their own funeral and expect them not to rise from the ashes. And I was done being buried that entire Sunday after the wedding. I walked through the house as if it were a museum of someone else's life. The kitchen felt foreign, the couch too stiff. Even the clothes in my closet seemed like they belonged to a person I no longer recognized. Something had been torn open inside me. And as I wandered from room to room, it was as if every memory came back louder than before, no longer whispering, but screaming. All the little flashbacks I used to ignore, all the moments I used to justify as nothing, were now rearranging themselves in my mind into a horrifying mosaic, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. It wasn't just the wedding. It never was. It was the time I got the job offer at the publishing house and Natalie accidentally told everyone. I had only gotten it because she had connections there, connections that didn't exist. It was the way her mom insisted I wear something less eye-catching at Natalie's graduation. Because it's her day. It was a family vacation to Italy, where I paid for half the trip but got left out of the family photo that ended up framed on the mantle for years. It was a story they always told at Thanksgiving about how I cried when I lost a school spelling bee, but never mentioned how I actually made it to the finals. It was 1,000 moments I dismissed as petty or isolated, but now they came back. In a flood, every snide comment, every erased success, every time I was asked to be supportive while my own milestones were ignored. I remember the birthday party, when Natalie received a surprise gift from the whole family. Even though it was my celebration, I remembered how she'd say, "Alyssa's just more sensitive than the rest of us," whenever I pushed back against a slight. I remembered being told I read too much into things, and how I started to believe it. That was the worst part. How long I had convinced myself it was all in my head. But it wasn't. The wedding was the climax, yes, but the story had been playing out for years. And what made it more grotesque in retrospect was the precision. Everything about that wedding, down to the lighting and the menu, had meaning. Caleb had noticed it first, and now that I was seeing it with unclouded eyes, it was impossible to ignore. The seating chart, for example. Natalie placed me at a table with 3 of my ex-friends, women I hadn't spoken to in years due to betrayal and gossip. All of them were still in Natalie's life, of course, and when I sat down, I remember the stares, the smirks. I thought it was awkward coincidence. Now I knew it wasn't. It was intentional. She wanted me isolated, uncomfortable, not surrounded by people who loved me, just witnesses. The song during the cake cutting, it was the same one I used in a short film I directed in college. A film Natalie mocked for being too emotional. I hadn't heard that song in years. Hearing it there, in that moment, felt like a punch I didn't know I had taken until it bruised my chest the next morning. Even the name tags had a code. Everyone had elegant cursive place cards with middle names included. Mine simply said Alyssa, no last name, no middle name, just Alyssa. Like I didn't belong to anyone. Like I didn't even warrant a full identity. There was the dessert, cherry tarts. Natalie hated cherries. I knew that because I loved them. And she always made a point to say how disgusting they were. So why serve them at her wedding? Because she knew I liked them, because she knew it would look like a gesture, while actually being a mockery. She made me think I was part of the event while simultaneously making sure I felt like a stranger in the room. And then there was my father's speech. I kept replaying it in my mind, every time he used the word legacy. Every time he spoke of Natalie leading the way for our generation. I thought it was just his usual favoritism. But now I remembered the way his eyes scanned the room as he said it. He wanted me to hear it. He wanted everyone else to watch me hear it. I was a contrast. Natalie was a star. And I was a backdrop, the dull, faded wall that made her shine brighter. It made sense now why I had been excluded from the bridal suite that morning. She said it was too crowded, but I had bought her the robe she wore. I had offered to help her with her hair. I had offered my time, my presence, my love. She didn't want it. She wanted my absence, so she could frame it however she liked, and I let her. I let them all. Until Caleb whispered. Until we left, and even now, sitting in my quiet home, I couldn't decide which realization hurt more. That they had done it, or that I had been so well trained to accept it. I almost clapped when they did. Because that's the thing about long-term emotional manipulation. It doesn't scream, it seeps. It rewrites your script until you believe you deserve the backseat. Until you start apologizing for things no one else remembers, and when the final act comes, the moment when you're supposed to finally snap, you don't. You smile. You raise your glass. You play along, until someone you love says, "We Have to leave, now. And you listen, now, those flashbacks are no longer nightmares, they're evidence. I hold them one by one, not as weights to carry, but as keys. They unlock doors I had shut for years, doors to truth, to self-respect, to grief, yes, but also to freedom. That wedding didn't break me. It woke me up. The next few days were strangely quiet. I didn't hear from Natalie. No one from my family reached out. Not even the cousins who usually sent a quick fun night, right? After big gatherings. It was as if I had been officially erased, like a prop no longer needed after the show had ended, and that silence gave me time to think. Not just about what had happened, but about how far it had gone without me noticing. The phrase kept repeating in my head: this wasn't a wedding. It was a performance with costumes, lines, lighting, an audience, everything carefully curated not to celebrate love, but to project an image. And I wasn't just in the audience, I was the emotional scapegoat, the punchline, the plot twist, the one that made the leading lady shine brighter by contrast. I began to dissect everything, like a film editor scrubbing through each frame of a psychological thriller, realizing you've been watching the villain's plan unfold the entire time, but only now you're seeing the clues, noticing how the guests had been arranged, how Natalie had forgotten to invite several of my closest friends, claiming there were venue limitations, how the speeches made indirect comparisons between Natalie's success and someone unnamed, still finding their way. I now knew who that someone was supposed to be. What twisted me inside wasn't just the humiliation, it was the clarity, the craftsmanship. Natalie had turned her wedding into a scripted production, and I had walked onto the set like a fool, thinking I was coming to a celebration, not an execution. Even the flower arrangements had meaning. Peonies, her favorite, but also my least favorite. I remember how I once mentioned to her in passing that they made my allergies act up. So, of course, she chose them in massive bundles for the reception hall. It wasn't coincidence, it was insult draped in petals. And let's talk about the guest list. As Caleb later pointed out, most of the people there weren't close to Natalie at all. Some were old acquaintances from our high school days, people who had barely spoken to either of us in years, but those were the people who had witnessed Natalie and me growing up. People who remembered when I had better grades, better awards, when I got into college before her. She wanted those people there so they could see how she had won in the end. As if marriage was a scoreboard and success was a gown. Even the playlist that played after dinner, when the crowd loosened up and the dancing began, it included songs I loved when I was a teenager. But not in a nostalgic, celebratory way, no. It was songs tied to memories that Natalie knew were sensitive for me. Songs from moments of heartbreak, from my lowest points. And I remember her dancing to them with a grin so smug I didn't understand it then. I do now. She was dancing on my memories. The performance had rehearsals. She'd been setting this up for years, subtly reshaping our family's perception of me, painting me as fragile, bitter, jealous. So when the wedding came, and I was cast as the outsider, nobody questioned it. They assumed I had done something wrong, that I was sulking again, that I was always overreacting. She had handed them a script and they played their parts perfectly. And I had played mine. I sat at my table. I smiled for photos. I gave a toast that now makes my stomach turn. I even hugged her after the ceremony and told her she looked beautiful. Which she did. Beautiful like a villain in disguise. Caleb saw through it. He was the only one. And I remember now the tension in his jaw all night. The way he squeezed my hand too tight when someone made a strange comment. The way he kept checking my face during the speeches. He wasn't just being protective, he was watching me drown in real time, unsure if I even knew I was underwater. He later told me he didn't want to ruin the moment. But when Natalie's best friend gave her speech and joked, some sisters struggle to bloom, but Natalie's always been the flower. That was his breaking point. That was the moment he realized the cruelty wasn't passive, it was planned. He whispered, "We have to leave, now." And I thank God I listened up, because now, sitting here, finally letting it all process, I understand this wasn't just an event. It was a message, one final, carefully staged statement from my family that I was not one of them. Not anymore. That my quiet successes, my peace, my distance had somehow made me a threat. That Natalie couldn't just have her day, she needed to eclipse mine. But here's the thing about performances, they end, the music stops, the guests go home. The set is dismantled, and when the spotlight fades, you're left with the truth. Natalie might have controlled the scene, but I walked out of the theater, and that wasn't weakness. That was strength, because the most dangerous thing a target can do is step out of frame, and I did. In the days that followed, it was like the entire wedding kept replaying in my mind, only now I saw it all with new eyes. Not as a guest, not even as a sister, but as a main spectacle. I wasn't just part of the background, I was a target. It's strange how memory works. When you feel safe, you overlook things, you forgive little slights, you fill in the blanks with love or assumption. But once that veil is lifted, once you know that someone meant to hurt you, every detail becomes sharp, crystal clear. I began noticing not just the things that had happened that day, but how many of them were, specifically, designed to tear me down. I remember standing at the entrance of the venue, waiting for someone to greet me. Nobody came. The usher skipped me like I was a distant cousin no one really knew. I remember thinking it was a mistake. Now I know it wasn't. It was the first signal. I wasn't part of this. I wasn't welcome. My name was missing from the printed program. My table was shoved toward the back, near the kitchen doors, while people who had barely spoken to Natalie in years were seated front and center. One of the servers even asked me if I was with the catering company. I laughed it off. But deep down I knew I was a sister of the bride, and yet, somehow, I was being treated like a shadow. Like someone no one wanted to remember. And then there were the speeches. How could I have missed it? Natalie's speech began like any other sweet memories, a few jokes about childhood. But then she said something that didn't sit right at the time, but I ignored it. It hasn't always been easy being the one who's underestimated, who stayed quiet while others grabbed the spotlight, and everyone laughed politely, assuming it was humility. But I know that line wasn't about her. It was about me. She had always resented that. Once upon a time, I was the one people expected the most from. I was the one with the scholarships, the early career, the confidence. But when I chose a slower, quieter path, one without flashy job titles or public recognition, she saw an opportunity to rewrite the story, and she used her wedding to do it. Even the slideshow. God, how did I miss it? Picture after picture of Natalie with friends, Natalie traveling, Natalie graduating, and when I appeared, always in awkward angles, goofy faces, badly lit frames. The photos chosen with care to make me look small, insignificant, forgotten. One image still burns in my brain. It was from a family vacation years ago, me sitting alone on the edge of a dock, while everyone else huddled together smiling. I remember that trip. I had gotten into a fight with our parents the night before and chose not to join the morning outing. They took that photo and kept it for this moment to show the crowd that even then, I was apart, I was distant. They were building a narrative. And they succeeded because no one questioned it. No one asked why I wasn't in more photos, why I was sitting alone. They saw what Natalie wanted them to see, a bitter, isolated sister watching from the sidelines. But I wasn't bitter. I wasn't isolated. I had simply stopped performing for their approval. And for that, I became the threat. Because when someone refuses to play the role you cast them in, especially in families that thrive on control, they become dangerous. My silence, my independence, my refusal to compete, it wasn't seen as peace. It was seen as rebellion. And this wedding was their way of silencing me once and for all. Dress her up. Seat her in the back, say the quiet insults behind smiles, make sure everyone laughs. It was theater. But I wasn't in the audience. I was the plot twist, and the worst part? I had walked into it willingly because despite everything I still hoped there was love underneath, still hoped that maybe, for one day we could be a family again. That maybe this wedding could be a fresh start. But it wasn't. It was the final act. Caleb said something to me that night. After we got home and sat in silence for what felt like hours, he said, "They weren't trying to hurt you casually. They were celebrating your absence." And he was right. This wedding wasn't about love. It wasn't even about Natalie. It was about proving to the world and to me that I no longer belonged. They had rewritten the family script and I was a villain in it. But villains don't cry. Villains don't beg for a seat at the table. Villains rewrite their own story. And that's what I decided to do. Not out of revenge. Not out of pride. But out of survival. Because once you realize you were never meant to be part of the celebration, you stop asking for an invitation. You start building your own. The morning after the wedding, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink. Caleb was already up, moving quietly around the house, giving me space but staying close. I could feel his presence like a tether, grounding me, reminding me that I was still real, even if everything about the day before had felt like a hallucination. I hadn't said much to him after we got home, not because I was angry or confused, but because I was finally putting the pieces together. Every polite insult, every calculated absence, every time they made me feel like I was the one who never fit. I used to wonder if I was imagining it all. But now I knew better. It wasn't imagination. It was strategy. I stared at my phone for what felt like hours. No messages, no apologies. Just photos from guests, images of smiles, dancing, glasses raised. The illusion of joy perfectly filtered. I wasn't in any of them. It was like I hadn't even been there, and maybe, to them, I hadn't. Not really. I had been a placeholder, a ghost. A role they needed to fill so they could play theirs better. But I wasn't going to be a ghost anymore. At noon, I got in the car and drove Caleb didn't ask questions. He knew where I was going. He just placed his hand gently on my arm before I left and said, "You don't owe them kindness. But you do owe yourself closure." The house looked smaller than I remembered, maybe because I had grown too big to fit in it anymore. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually. But it still had the same crooked mailbox, the same cracked driveway, the same smell of overwatered grass and too much silence. My mother opened the door, surprised. Her eyes darted behind me, probably looking for Caleb. Or maybe to see if I had brought an audience. I hadn't. This was just me, raw, exhausted, and done pretending. "Alyssa," she said with that brittle tone she used when she wasn't sure how to fake affection. "Did you forget something at the venue?" I didn't answer. I stepped inside. The living room was empty, except for my father reading the paper and Natalie standing by the window, still glowing from yesterday. She looked at me like I was an unwanted memory returning uninvited. "I need to talk," I said. My voice was calm, clear, not loud, but it carried weight. My father sighed, folding the paper in half but not putting it down. Natalie didn't move. My mother hovered, unsure if she should smile or brace herself. I stood in the center of the room and let the silence stretch. "I know what yesterday was," I said finally. "And don't bother denying it. I saw it, I felt it, every second of it." Natalie raised an eyebrow. "Saw what? A wedding? A family celebrating?" "No," I replied, "a performance. A carefully choreographed humiliation, for me," she scoffed. "Alyssa, you always make things about you. That's your problem, you overanalyze everything." I smiled, but it wasn't kind to overanalyze. So the table assignments, the slideshow, the speeches, all just random. The fact that I was seated behind the pillar, the photo of me alone on the dock, coincidence? My mother interjected, "Honey, that photo was just nostalgic." "For whom?" I snapped, still keeping my voice steady. "For you, because I remember crying on that dock. I remember wondering why no one came looking for me." No one responded. The silence wasn't from guilt. It was from being caught. Natalie crossed her arms. "So what do you want, Alyssa? An apology? A do-over? You think I planned my wedding just to hurt you?" "No," I said. "I think you planned your wedding to erase me. And it almost worked. You wanted to be the daughter that mattered, the one who won. But you forgot something. I stopped competing a long time ago." My father finally spoke. "You've always been dramatic. We did nothing wrong, and that's why this ends now," I said. "Not because I want revenge, not because I want you to feel small, but because I refuse to keep shrinking to fit into this house." They stared at me, some with disbelief, some with contempt, but no one with love. I looked at Natalie, and for the first time, I didn't see the sister I once idolized. I saw a woman who needed a mirror to feel beautiful, who needed someone beneath her to feel tall. I turned to my mother. "You once told me that family is about showing up. Well, I showed up yesterday, and you locked the door in my face." My voice wavered, but I didn't cry. "Not this time. I'm not asking for anything," I continued. "I'm not here to rebuild. I'm here to walk away. On my own terms, with my own peace." They didn't stop me when I left. They didn't follow, and maybe that hurt more than anything. But it also freed me, because you don't need chains to feel trapped. Sometimes the smile of someone who's secretly rooting against you is enough. I drove away without looking back, and for the first time, I felt the road stretch forward. Not as an escape, but as an arrival. When I got home that day, the silence was different. It wasn't the cold kind. The kind that follows rejection or echoes through a childhood room where no one knocks before entering. It was soft, clean, and full of possibility. Caleb was in the kitchen, cutting lemons. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes searching mine, not for pain, but for a signal. Had I finally let go? I nodded once. That night, I slept like a woman unburdened. For years, I had carried a weight I didn't have the language to name. It wasn't just the comparisons or the backhanded compliments. It was the expectation that I would keep showing up to a role I never auditioned for, the lesser daughter, the quieter one, the background character to my sister's lead. Every holiday, every phone call, every carefully choreographed event, like that wedding, I had been assigned a script: smile, shrink, nod, and I had followed it. Because that's what love was supposed to look like, right? Making it easy for them, making myself small so they could feel big, laughing off the digs, accepting the crumbs. But something shifted when I left that wedding. Something permanent. Like I had walked through a door and realized it only locked from one side. There's doubt. In the days that followed, I stopped reaching out. I didn't call to explain myself. I didn't reply to the half-hearted texts Natalie sent, mostly to save face, just checking in, or "I hope you didn't take anything too personally." I didn't respond to my mother's passive-aggressive attempts to rewrite the wedding narrative. "You always read too much into things, sweetie. It was just a party." No, it wasn't just a party. And I wasn't just a guest. They knew exactly what they were doing. Now, so did I? Caleb watched all of this unfold quietly. He never once said, "I told you so." though he could have. He had seen it long before I did. The way they dimmed my light under the guise of family warmth. The way they clapped for me with hands, already full of judgment. One morning, over coffee, he said, "You look taller." I laughed. It's a freedom, and it was. Real freedom isn't a grand gesture or a final confrontation. It's a quiet clarity that comes from choosing yourself every day. Every moment, especially when others won't. It's walking away not in anger, but in peace. In the months that followed, I poured myself into things that fed me, my work, my art, my community. I started a blog, anonymous at first, about invisible daughters. I wrote about the silence, the gaslighting, the way families can wound with smiles and sharpened cake knives. The post went viral. Thousands of women messaged me, saying they had sat at similar wedding tables, worn similar tight-lipped smiles, swallowed similar pain. I wasn't alone, and that changed everything. One day, a major publication reached out. They wanted to feature my blog in a piece about emotional estrangement and reclaiming identity. I agreed. But this time, I used my real name. When the article was published, my phone lit up. Not with congratulations from my family, of course, but with messages from strangers who felt seen, who finally had words for what they'd endured. Natalie posted something vague on social media. Some people build their careers on victimhood. Glad I don't have to fake pain for attention. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The comments spoke for themselves. People had watched the wedding clips, read the blog. The truth had already done its work. One comment stuck with me. "You didn't burn bridges. You just stopped crossing them alone." Double quotes exactly. Because leaving isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just stopping the calls, the explanations, the desperate attempts to belong in a story that was never written for you. Now, when people ask if I'm close to my family, I say this: I'm close to the people who see me, who clap with empty hands and open hearts, who don't make me earn my seat, and that's enough. Because I didn't walk away from a wedding, I walked into my own freedom, and I'm never going back.